Daniel had never been the kind of person who attracted attention. Before all of this, he had lived a quiet life, a simple one. Far away from crowded cities and political conflicts, he spent his days surrounded by machines, research notes, and endless streams of data. His world had been numbers, experiments, routine. He fixed problems that could be measured. He studied things that could be explained. But now, nothing was simple anymore. Everywhere he went, people looked at him differently. Some looked at him with admiration. They called him brave, a hero, the human who protected an alien child when everyone else was afraid. Others looked at him with suspicion. They whispered that he had become too close to an alien species, that he had forgotten where he came from, that protecting one child had changed his loyalty. Daniel ignored the whispers. At least, he tried to. Because there was one person whose opinion he could not ignore. The Queen. She never said much. She didn't need to. Her eyes carried the weight of an entire civilization. Every time she looked at Daniel, he felt the same thing. She wasn't just seeing the man who rescued a child. She was judging the person who had become important to her daughter. And that responsibility was heavier than any title. The child was still with him. Even though she had been reunited with her own people, she kept returning. Again and again. During the day, she followed him through the station corridors. She watched him repair equipment. She asked endless questions. She laughed whenever he showed her small human devices. Simple things. A mechanical tool, a tiny drone, a device that projected images into the air. Things Daniel had never thought were special. But to her, they were magic. In the evenings, she would sit beside him in silence. Sometimes she leaned against him. Sometimes she simply stayed nearby. Like she belonged there. Like he belonged to her. And Daniel couldn't deny the feeling growing inside him. She had become family. That thought frightened him more than anything. Because family meant something could be lost. One night, as the station lights dimmed, Daniel watched her sleeping peacefully. His expression softened. Then the question returned. The one he had been avoiding. What happens when they leave? Because they would leave. Her people had a home. A civilization waiting for their princess. A place where she truly belonged. Daniel knew that. He had always known. But knowing something was right did not make it easier. The station had changed since the rescue. Every corridor carried rumors. Every conversation stopped when Daniel walked past. Some said the alien empire would reward him. Some said they would take the child away and never allow him to see her again. Others feared what her return meant. Because the galaxy was watching. For centuries, humans and alien civilizations had stood apart. Different. Careful. Suspicious. But one human soldier had crossed that distance without weapons. Without orders. Without expecting anything in return. And now everyone wanted to know what that meant. The Queen finally requested a private meeting. Daniel entered the royal chamber expecting a negotiation. Instead, he found the Queen standing beside her daughter. The child immediately ran toward him. The Queen watched quietly. Then she spoke. Daniel. Her voice was calm. You saved my daughter. He nodded. I did what anyone should have done. The Queen studied him. That is exactly why you are different. Daniel looked confused. She continued. Most beings help when they expect something. They seek power, rewards, influence. But you helped because she needed help. A long silence followed. Then the Queen asked the question Daniel feared. If she chooses to stay with you. She paused. Will you allow her? Daniel looked at the child, then back at the Queen, because suddenly he understood. This was no longer about rescuing an alien child. It was about choosing a future. For her. For him. For two civilizations that had never truly trusted each other. And Daniel realized something. The hardest part of saving someone was not keeping them alive. It was knowing when to let them choose where they belonged. Some researchers argued that Daniel should go with the aliens. that his bond with the child made him the best bridge between humans and their kind. Others warned that if he left, humanity might lose him forever. One evening, Daniel found himself sitting alone in the small observation room. The stars shone brightly outside, scattered across the dark sky like silver dust. He leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. His thoughts circled endlessly. "What am I supposed to do?" he whispered to himself as if on cue. The door slid open, and the Queen entered. She didn't need attendance tonight. She stepped quietly into the room, her presence filling the air even in silence. "You look troubled," she said softly. Daniel straightened, not sure how to respond. "I guess you could say that." She walked closer, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "Your mind is full of questions. I see them every time I look at you." Daniel sighed. "I don't know where I belong anymore. This station was my home, but now it feels like I'm being pulled somewhere else." "With her?" He paused, then added, "With you?" The Queen tilted her head, listening carefully. "Do you believe belonging is a place, Daniel, or is it the people who hold you?" The question struck him deeply. He thought about his colleagues, people he respected, but never felt truly close to. Then he thought about the child whose trust in him was so pure, and the Queen, whose presence stirred emotions he wasn't ready to name. "I don't know," he admitted. "I only know that if I leave with you, I'll lose the life I built here. And if I stay, I'll lose something else. Something I'm only beginning to understand." The Queen moved closer, her gaze never leaving his. "That is your dilemma. To remain where you were, or to step into what could be. Both paths will cost you something. Both paths will give you something. The question is not which is safer, but which speaks to your heart." Daniel swallowed hard. Her words were wise, but they didn't make the decision easier. He thought about Earth, his family, though far away. He thought about the station, his work, his small routines. But when he thought about the child's laughter and the Queen's steady eyes, his chest tightened in a way that made him wonder if his choice was already made, even if he hadn't said it aloud. In the following days, the tension grew. Some researchers confronted him directly. "You can't just go with them," one said. "What if they never bring you back?" Another added. "You're human, you belong with us." Daniel tried to explain, but the words never seemed enough. The child was a living reminder that his heart was already split between two worlds. The Queen gave him space, never pressuring him, but her presence was constant. She would glance at him during discussions, her expression calm, but filled with quiet expectation. She wasn't demanding, she was waiting. One night, Daniel stood outside, looking up at the alien ship that hovered silently above the valley. It gleamed in the moonlight, like a promise of something unknown. The child came to stand beside him, slipping her small hand into his. She looked up at him and whispered his name, her voice filled with warmth. He looked down at her, and in her glowing eyes, he saw trust, a trust he couldn't betray. The Queen's words echoed in his mind. "Belonging is not a place, but the people who hold you." And Daniel knew, though he hadn't yet said it aloud, that his heart was leaning toward the unknown, toward her, toward them. The next morning, Daniel woke up earlier than usual. The research station was quiet, the hallways filled with the soft hum of machines. He rubbed his eyes and almost wondered if the night before had been a dream. But when he walked into the small room where the girl had slept, the truth was waiting for him. She was there, curled up on the blanket he had given her. Her skin glowed faintly in the dim light, and her chest rose and fell in the calm rhythm of sleep. She looked peaceful, almost angelic, as though she belonged to another world entirely. Daniel stood for a while, watching her. Something about her presence stirred feelings he couldn't put into words. Protectiveness, wonder, and a strange sense that his life had taken a turn he couldn't reverse. When she stirred awake, her eyes opened wide, shining with that otherworldly brightness. She blinked at him, and for a second, Daniel thought she might be afraid again. But then she recognized him and relaxed, giving him that faint smile he had seen the night before. "Good morning," Daniel said, unsure why he felt the need to speak, even though she likely didn't understand his language. To his surprise, she tilted her head and replied in her soft musical tone. He still didn't know what the words meant, but they didn't feel strange anymore. They felt like a melody. Later, as the team gathered in the main hall, the atmosphere buzzed with unease. The other researchers whispered among themselves, throwing glances at the girl who now walked beside Daniel, holding onto his hand as though she belonged there. "She can't stay here," one of them muttered. "What if her people come looking for her?" another asked. "And what if they blame us for taking her?" Daniel frowned at their words. He understood their fear, but his heart told him differently. This wasn't a situation where rules and procedures could decide the outcome. This was about a child, scared, alone, and in need of care. When the conversation grew louder, the girl pressed closer against Daniel, hiding behind his arm. That was enough for him. He raised his voice, calm but firm. "She's not a problem," he said. "She's a child. She needs us. She needs safety, and I found her out there. I'll take responsibility." The room fell quiet. The others exchanged uneasy looks, but no one argued further. Daniel had made his choice clear. Over the next few days, Daniel spent more time with her than anyone else. He learned small things about her. How she liked the soft glow of the lamps, how she tilted her head when she was curious, how she touched objects gently, as though every little thing fascinated her. She didn't speak his language, but she watched him closely, repeating small gestures and sounds, slowly bridging the gap between them. Sometimes, when the others weren't watching, she would hum in her own tongue, a song so gentle it felt like starlight in sound. Daniel found himself listening in silence, wishing he could understand every word. But it wasn't just Daniel who noticed her uniqueness. Strange things began to happen around her. Once when the power flickered in the station, the lights near her glowed brighter as though responding to her presence. Another time, when a small piece of equipment broke, she touched it curiously, and for a brief moment, it worked again. The team whispered more than ever, "She's not just any child." Someone said, "She must be from one of the advanced races, maybe royalty. What if she's dangerous?" Daniel didn't see danger in her, he saw wonder. Yet even he couldn't deny that she was extraordinary. One evening, as he sat with her by the large observation window, Daniel gently asked, "Where do you come from? Is someone looking for you?" The girl pointed toward the distant stars. Then she touched her chest and said a single word. It sounded like a name. Her name. Daniel repeated it clumsily, and she smiled, correcting his pronunciation with soft laughter. It was the first time he had heard her laugh, and it warmed him more than he expected. Not long after, the answer to his questions arrived. A ship. It appeared one morning hovering above the valley like a silver crescent against the orange sky. The entire station shook with excitement and fear. The researchers ran to the window staring in awe as the enormous vessel descended. It was unlike anything they had seen before, smooth, elegant, and glowing faintly with energy. Daniel looked at the girl. Her eyes widened, shimmering brighter than ever. She whispered something quickly, and though he couldn't understand the words, he knew what they meant. She recognized the ship. It had come for her. Within the hour, figures appeared outside the station, tall, graceful beings with the same glowing skin and luminous eyes as the child. Their movements were calm, but purposeful. They were not strangers here to fight. They were here to reclaim someone precious. And then she arrived, the Queen. Daniel didn't need anyone to tell him who she was. The moment she stepped into view, surrounded by attendants he knew, she carried herself with power and calm, her presence filling the space even before she entered the station. Her garments shimmered like liquid light, and her eyes glowed with wisdom and strength. She was both beautiful and intimidating, every bit a ruler. When the girl saw her, she let go of Daniel's hand for the first time and ran forward, calling out with joy. The Queen bent down gracefully, gathering her daughter in her arms. The sight brought relief to everyone watching. The child was safe, reunited with her people. But as the Queen held her daughter, she lifted her gaze and met Daniel's eyes. Her expression shifted, surprise, curiosity, and something else he couldn't define. She spoke softly to her attendants, who nodded, then stepped back. With her daughter still in her arms, the Queen walked toward Daniel. He stood still, unsure what to do. She was taller than he expected, her presence overwhelming yet strangely gentle. "You," she said, in accented but clear human language. Daniel blinked, startled that she could speak to him at all. "You found her," the Queen continued. "You kept her safe." Daniel nodded slowly. "I did what anyone would have done." The Queen tilted her head slightly, studying him, with eyes that seemed to see through every layer of his being. "Not anyone. You risked yourself without knowing who she was. For that, You are owed." Her words echoed through the hall. The other researchers exchanged wide-eyed glances, whispering in shock. Daniel's heart pounded. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew his life was about to change again. The Queen placed a hand gently over her daughter's head, then looked back at him with a gaze that felt unshakable. "You will not be forgotten, human. The bond you created with my child is not one that fades." Daniel swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. He glanced at the girl who looked back at him with a smile, as though reassuring him. In that moment, Daniel realized something deeper. He hadn't just rescued her. He had become part of her story, and now the Queen herself had stepped into his. The day of departure came faster than Daniel expected. The alien ship lowered closer to the valley, its shining surface reflecting the orange sun. The researcher stood outside the station, watching in awe and unease. Daniel felt the weight of the moment pressing on his chest. The child was beside him, holding his arm tightly, her glow brighter than usual. The Queen stood before her people, regal and composed, yet her eyes kept returning to him. When the time came, the Queen spoke, her voice carried across the valley, firm and clear. "My daughter was lost, and a human found her. Not only found her, he shielded her, cared for her, and gave her safety. Such acts are not forgotten among my people, they are honored, and so I make this known. Daniel is not only protector, he is claimed by us." Gasps spread through the human researchers. Claimed, the word rang in Daniel's ears, heavy with meaning. He stepped forward, his voice unsteady, but honest. "What does that mean?" The Queen's gaze softened. "It means you are one of us now. Not by blood, but by bond. My daughter chose you, and I too see in you a courage I will not let fade into the distance of another world." The child nodded eagerly, hugging his arm as if sealing the declaration herself. Daniel's heart pounded. He looked back at the other humans. Some shook their heads. Some looked envious, and some simply stared in disbelief. This was the moment of choice. If he stayed, life would return to normal routines, safe, familiar, predictable. But something inside him whispered that if he walked away now, he would always feel the emptiness of what could have been. He looked at the Queen again. Her eyes met his steadily, not commanding, but inviting. "You're asking me to leave everything I know," Daniel said quietly. "No," she replied. "I am asking you to walk toward what you have already begun. You are not leaving your life. You are expanding it. You will still be you, but more. You will still be human, but also something greater." Her words stirred something deep inside him. He thought about the child's laughter, about the Queen's calm wisdom, about the way his life had already shifted since the day he saw her glowing figure in the valley. Finally, he let out a slow breath. "Then I'll go," the child cheered softly, wrapping both arms around him. The Queen's eyes glimmered, though her expression remained composed. "Then it is done," she said. "You are ours, Daniel. Protector, friend, and more." The humans murmured behind him, but their voices felt distant. For the first time in his life, Daniel didn't feel like he was walking away from something. He felt like he was walking toward it. As the ship's doors opened and the alien light spilled across the valley, Daniel stepped forward beside the Queen and her daughter. The world he had known grew smaller behind him, but the path ahead glowed with promise. He didn't know what waited for him among the stars, but he knew this. He wasn't going alone. He had chosen them, and they had chosen him. The Queen glanced at him one last time before they entered the ship, her voice quiet but certain. "You are claimed, Daniel, and you will never walk forgotten." And with that, the ship rose, carrying him into a future that was no longer just human, but something far greater. A future bound by courage, trust, and an unexpected bond that had begun with the simple act of shielding a child. Daniel never thought that an ordinary day at the research station would change his life forever. He was used to routines, the morning checks of the equipment, the endless reports about soil samples and air quality, the quiet hum of machines that kept the place running. The outpost was small, built on the edge of a valley on a planet that still felt strange to him. It wasn't Earth, but he had grown used to calling it home for the past 2 years. Life there was calm, sometimes lonely, but predictable. That was about to change. The afternoon started like any other. The sun of this world was a pale orange, and the sky stretched endlessly, with faint streaks of silver clouds. Daniel was walking along the outer edge of the research station, making sure the perimeter sensors were working. He liked this part of the day when he could step outside the metal walls and breathe the cool air. The valley below stretched with tall, glowing plants that swayed as if they were alive. Sometimes when the wind blew through them, they made a soft humming sound. He paused near one of the tall trees and checked his scanner. Everything seemed normal. But then something caught his eye. A small movement among the glowing plants, quick and uncertain, like someone or something trying to hide. At first, he thought it was one of the local animals. The valley was full of harmless creatures that looked strange but rarely caused trouble. But when he looked again, his heart skipped. It wasn't an animal. It was a child. Daniel blinked, almost not believing what he was seeing. The figure was small, barely up to his waist, and dressed in thin, shimmering clothes that looked nothing like the standard gear humans wore. Her skin had a soft glow to it, like light reflecting from water, and her eyes were far too large and bright to belong to a human child. She looked lost, frightened, and completely out of place. For a long moment, Daniel stood frozen. His training at the research station had prepared him for data collection, survival tactics, and emergency repairs. But it had not prepared him for this. He knew there were intelligent species beyond humans, though most were distant rumors or stories told by explorers. Yet here was proof standing in front of him in the valley, an alien child. The child looked at him wide-eyed as though deciding whether to run or trust him. Daniel slowly lifted his hands to show he meant no harm. "Hey, it's okay," he said softly, even though he had no idea if she could understand him. "I won't hurt you." The girl tilted her head, almost curious. But then Daniel noticed something that made his stomach tighten behind her. The plants rustled heavily, not just from the wind. Something else was moving, something larger, faster, and closing in. The child's glow dimmed slightly, and fear flashed in her big eyes. She took a step back, trembling. Daniel's instincts kicked in. He didn't know what was chasing her, but he knew she was in danger. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and motioned for her to come closer. She hesitated, clutching her small hands together, but when the rustling grew louder, she darted toward him and clung to his arm. Her touch was warm, lighter than he expected, almost as if she were made of energy and flesh at the same time. "Don't worry, I've got you," Daniel whispered, even though he was speaking more to reassure himself. He led her quickly toward the research station, glancing back every few seconds. The plants behind them swayed violently now, but Daniel didn't look long enough to see what was there. All he knew was that he had to protect this child. The closer they got to the station, the calmer he felt. The security systems would keep anything dangerous out. But what surprised him more was the way the girl never let go of his arm. She stayed close, her glowing eyes fixed on him, as though he were the only safe thing in the world. When they reached the gates, Daniel bent down slightly so he could look at her better. "You're safe here. No one will hurt you." She blinked slowly, almost as if she understood. Then, to his astonishment, she whispered something in a soft musical tone. He didn't recognize the words, but the way she said them carried meaning. Gratitude, trust. Inside the station, the other researchers gasped when they saw her. They gathered quickly, their voices filled with shock and questions. "Is that a child? She's not human. Look at her skin. Where did she come from?" Daniel didn't have answers. He only knew one thing, that he had found her, alone and scared, and he couldn't just walk away. She needed him. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he felt he needed her too. The child clung closer as the others tried to approach. Daniel raised a hand, stopping them. "Give her space. She's frightened." They looked at him with surprise, but they obeyed. The girl pressed her face against his arm, hiding from their stares. Daniel's heart ached. Whoever she was, wherever she came from, she was just a child, and he had promised himself in that moment that he would protect her. That night, after the others had gone back to their work, Daniel sat with her in one of the quiet rooms. He gave her water and a soft blanket. Though he wasn't sure she needed either, she watched him with those luminous eyes, studying him like he was just as strange to her as she was to him. "You're not alone anymore," Daniel told her gently. "I'll make sure of that." The child tilted her head as though she understood for the first time since he had seen her. She smiled, a small glowing smile that lit up the room. Daniel didn't know it then, but this simple act of kindness, this choice to protect a child who wasn't even human, would change everything. It would bring people and beings into his life that he never imagined. It would place him in the center of a story far bigger than himself. And it all began here, with a frightened alien child who found safety in the arms of a human who refused to turn away. Daniel didn't sleep much after the Queen's arrival. The image of her eyes, bright and unshakable, lingered in his mind. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling of his small room, listening to the faint hum of the station. He had thought that protecting the child was the end of his responsibility, but now it felt like the beginning of something larger, something he didn't fully understand. The next day, the Queen returned to the station. She didn't come alone. Several of her attendants followed, their movements graceful and precise, as though every step was part of a dance. Yet even surrounded by her people, she stood apart. She carried an air of authority that filled the space without effort. The researchers gathered nervously, whispering among themselves. Some were curious, others afraid. Few had ever seen beings like this up close, let alone spoken to them. Daniel stood near the back, trying to avoid drawing attention. He wasn't sure if he wanted to meet her gaze again, but when the Queen entered the hall, her eyes swept over the room, and as if drawn by instinct, they landed directly on him. "Human," she said clearly, her voice calm, but carrying weight. "Step forward." The crowd parted quickly, leaving Daniel, no choice but to walk toward her. His steps felt heavy, and his pulse quickened. He stopped a few feet away, unsure whether he should bow, salute, or simply stand. "You are Daniel," she said. "Yes," he replied softly. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she gestured toward her daughter, who stood by her side, holding her hand. The child looked at Daniel and beamed, her eyes glowing with trust. "My daughter speaks of you," the Queen continued. "She tells me you shielded her when she was lost, that you brought her safety. She calls you." The Queen paused, listening as the child whispered a word in her ear. A small smile touched the Queen's lips. "She calls you protector." The word settled over Daniel like a weight. Protector. He hadn't thought of himself that way. He had simply acted when he saw a child in need, yet hearing it from the Queen spoken with such seriousness made it feel like a title. "I only did what felt right," Daniel said, his voice steady but humble. "She was alone. I couldn't leave her out there." The Queen's eyes softened, though her presence remained powerful. "Do you know what that means to us?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "In our world," she explained slowly, "to shield a child, especially one of the royal line, is to bind yourself to her fate. You have touched her future, and in doing so, you have touched mine." The hall grew still. The researchers exchanged shocked glances. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He hadn't meant for his actions to carry such weight. He had only wanted to protect her. "I didn't know," he admitted quietly. The Queen stepped closer, her luminous eyes fixed on him. "That is why it matters even more. You did not act for gain or for power. You acted from heart." Daniel swallowed, unsure what to say. He felt the child's gaze on him too, her small smile filled with warmth. The Queen straightened, addressing both him and the others. "Present among my people, there are many who show strength, but few show courage without reason. Few are still extended to those who are not of their own kind. You, Daniel, did not see a stranger. You saw a child. That is a truth my people must not forget." The attendants nodded solemnly, as though her words were a decree. Daniel's mind raced. He hadn't sought recognition. He didn't want to be the center of attention. Yet now, the Queen herself had placed him there. Later that day, she requested to speak with him privately. He followed her into one of the station's quieter chambers, where the glowing light of the planet sun filtered through the window. The child sat nearby, humming softly to herself, while the Queen turned her full attention to him. "Do you fear me?" she asked. Daniel hesitated, then answered honestly. "A little, not because of who you are, but because I don't know what this means for me, for my life." The Queen tilted her head as though weighing his words. "That is wise. Fear is not weakness when it is met with honesty. You wonder what role you now play in this story. You wonder if you belong to it at all." Daniel nodded. "You must understand," she continued, her voice softer now. "When my daughter clung to you, she chose you. That choice is not easily undone." Daniel glanced at the girl who sat cross-legged on the floor, tracing patterns with her glowing fingers. She looked content, at peace, as though she trusted that everything was as it should be. "What happens now?" Daniel asked quietly. The Queen's eyes shimmered as she regarded him. "What happens now is for us to decide. You have earned a place in her life and by extension in mine. That bond cannot be ignored." Daniel's breath caught. He wasn't sure what she meant, but he sensed that his world was shifting beneath his feet. He had gone from an ordinary researcher to something he couldn't yet name. Over the following days, the Queen and her people visited the station often. They spoke with the researchers, learning what they could about human life on the planet. But no matter how busy she was, the Queen always found time to glance toward Daniel, as though making sure he hadn't forgotten her words. The child spent even more time with him, walking beside him during his rounds, humming her soft songs, or simply sitting near him as if his presence alone gave her comfort. The other researchers began to see the bond too. Some teased Daniel gently, calling him the alien's guardian. Others looked at him with quiet envy, wishing they had been the one to find her, but none denied the connection between him, the child, and the Queen. One evening, as the orange sun dipped low, Daniel stood outside the station, looking across the valley. The Queen approached silently, her steps soundless against the soft ground. She stopped beside him, her gaze also fixed on the horizon. "You wonder if your life is still your own," she said softly. Daniel looked at her in surprise. It was as though she could read his thoughts. "Do not think I mean to take it," she continued. "But when you protected my daughter, you changed its path. You are woven into it now, whether you wish it or not." He took a deep breath. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." The Queen turned her head, her expression unreadable, but gentle. "Few ever are. But readiness is not what matters. Choices. And though my people see this as destiny, I will not force it upon you. Still, I cannot deny what I see." "What do you see?" Daniel asked. Her eyes glowed brighter in the fading light. "I see a man of courage, a man my daughter trusts, a man I would not let slip away from us." Her words hung in the air, heavy, yet filled with meaning. Daniel felt his chest tighten again, but this time not with fear. Something else stirred, something he couldn't quite name. The Queen didn't press further. She simply looked at him for a long moment, before turning back to the valley. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, alive, carrying an unspoken connection. Daniel realized then that this wasn't just recognition for his actions. It was the beginning of something larger, a bond that reached beyond duty, beyond gratitude, a bond that tied him to the child and to the Queen herself.